From the Middle is a founding member of the Odd Pods Media Network.
Oh, for the love. Sorry, just clearing my Mountain Dew hole.
I got my phone hole cleaned today.
That's where you keep it?
You're so cerebral and you're so developed and evolved. From the Middle after dark over here.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 97 of From the Middle, a comedy, culture, entertainment, and all-around geek culture podcast. We are three middle-class guys living in the middle of America, in the middle chapters of our lives, with a point of view that's somewhere in the middle. You guys, I have a fun little trivia for you. Do you remember SNL used to do a series of sketches featuring Chris Farley called The Chris Farley Show? There were only ever 3 instances of this sketch, but he would interview celebrities. The most famous of which was when he interviewed Paul McCartney. And Chris plays himself, and he's just so excited to be with one of his heroes that he can't ask questions. He's so nervous. Well, that is me tonight. We have one of my art heroes, Tom Richmond. Tom is one of the usual gang of idiots, a Mad Magazine artist and professional caricaturist, cartoonist, and illustrator. Tom, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, my pleasure.
Do you remember when you were with Mad Magazine? That was awesome. Yeah, seriously,
Pretty
man.
good, Chris Farley.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. It was about 2 years ago, Tom, that Paul Combs introduced us to one another. I was considering joining NCS and was going through the process to make that happen. And then COVID happened and whatever. So I exploited that contact information and asked you to be on the podcast. And for some reason you agreed. So yeah, that's pretty cool. We're really excited to have you. So shout out to Paul Combs. I am forever indebted to him for making that connection. And you know, you and Paul used to do these USO tours.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that, and what you guys would do on those tours.
Well, they were part of the National Caricature Network program, so or National Cartoon Society program rather, and the NCS actually got its start doing chalk talks for the troops in World War II. So this was something that they started doing again in about 10 years ago. And I was lucky enough to be on the first trip. And yeah, Paul and I went on a few of them. And what we would do is we just get a group of cartoonists together, and the USO would send us over to the war zone, and we would go to these camps and fobs and draw cartoons for active troops that were there, you know, serving thousands of miles away from their families. And man, it was really, really cool. I mean, getting a chance to spend time with these folks and out there, and they're all, you know, doing their thing and just so far away from home. And I would draw caricatures of them, and some of the other guys were really famous cartoonists that worked on like the Family Circus or blues, Baby Blues or Pearls Before Swine, and they would draw their characters and put, hi, Johnson family or something, and it was just the best. And these people were just the nicest, and they were so excited for us to be there, and we got to see some pretty intense places, so it was just a lot of great, really rewarding.
I know Paul speaks very fondly of sharing some of those experiences with you. What's one of your most memorable experiences being in war zones doing caricatures of soldiers?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. My favorite trip was when we went to the USS Enterprise, the aircraft carrier that had been decommissioned. In fact, we were the last USO tour to go to visit the Enterprise, and we were on it, and they were in the middle of the Persian Gulf. And that's where we had to do the cod landing, where
Wow.
you go in on the plane, and then the cable grabs you and it stops you from falling into the ocean and dying. And then when we left, they had to catapult us off there too. That was so totally nuts. But my favorite moment, this is a story I tell all the time. So we went to Kandahar in Afghanistan, and we had just gotten there, and they put us in these little billets where it was like three of us to a little, room, and on the base. And we were exhausted. Like, we had just traveled in from Germany and flew on a C-10 Hercules, and it was just we were wiped out. So everybody just sort of put their gear down. We had about an hour before we needed to go anywhere and do anything. So I lay down at my bunk and almost immediately fell asleep. And I'm listening to music in my headphones. Little did I know that shortly, a few seconds later, there was a rocket attack on the base. And so the sirens are going off, and everybody's racing to the bunkers to sit down in there. Everybody forgot about me. So I slept through the rocket attack. And when they came back in looking for me, and there I was fast asleep, and they were like, "You just missed this rocket attack. Oh my God, we thought maybe you were going to get blown up." Well, the rocket attack was one rocket that made it about 5 feet over the fence, and probably didn't explode. And then whoever shot it off, instantly wiped off the face of the earth. But yeah, so these guys endlessly razz me now about how, yeah, well, if there's a rocket attack, Tom's the last guy we're going to worry about, because he runs the slowest. So, the bear gets him and everybody else gets away.
That's such an incredible story that I'm so glad I can pass along, because everyone says I can sleep through anything. And now I can be like, well, I have a story for you. I know a guy.
I got pretty famous for being able to sleep anywhere on those trips. When we went to Baghdad, we flew from a camp in actually a little north of Baghdad into Crete, and we flew out to these FOBs that were out in the desert. That's operating bases that were far away from the main base, and we flew in Black Hawk helicopters. And when you're in one of these Black Hawks, they've got you strapped down, and one door is open, and it's like you got to have headphones or earphones on, because the noise would deafen you. It's that crazy. And you're, going through, and you're going, I'm like this, fast asleep. Like I'm like Hicks and Aliens, when they do the drop. And I could just instantly fall asleep anywhere if I was tired enough. And so I slept through a lot of the Black Hawk stuff, just because, you sleep where you get to sleep.
That's great. Well, listen, Tom, if they fire up those USO tours again, I want to be a part of that with the NCS. And I think that sounds like a lot of fun, and would love to show our troops just how much they mean to all of us in that way. So that would be awesome. But this is what I love about our podcast. And you honored us by saying you had checked out an episode or two before joining tonight. And we try not to ask the questions that people would always get asked for whatever their profession is or whatever it is that they do. So this is the type of stuff that we love. So we'll no doubt touch on the MAD experience and your experience working there. But tell us a little bit about yourself, perhaps outside of the traditional art bio that's on your page, or what else would you add to just sort of introduce yourself to our listeners?
Well, let's see. I've been married for 32 years this fall, 33 years this fall actually, and I've got 4 kids. They're all grown up. None of them are artists, but they're all musically talented.
Wow. Okay.
Which I don't know where they got that from, because I can't sing like 2 notes together and make it sound good. But all my kids were performers and musicians and singers, and so I guess that's where the art gene kind of manifested with them. Mm-hmm. My oldest daughter, Elizabeth, is autistic, and so she is and not a very high functioning autism. So they all grew up in an environment where they learned about compassion and how, people, how lucky you are. They never, they didn't take anything for granted, realizing that, what they had was something that not everybody has. And I think that helped shape them too, as the adults they are. Very proud of my kids.
Yeah.
They're all fantastic. So my wife is like my right arm. That's my drawing arm, by the way. So that's pretty important.
Yeah.
And she's very supportive, and I think behind every cartoonist, there's got to be a supportive spouse, because if the cartoonist, he or she, does not have one of those, it's going to be hard, because cartooning is not, an illustration and freelancing, not an easy way to make a living,
I can speak to that. I mean, I am the product of a supportive wife, because if you say I want to draw and do art for a living and do caricatures and cartoons and logos, it takes somebody who's special to go, I believe in you, and I can get behind that. We had a comedian on, Kellen Erskine, and he shared the same sentiment, that those are atypical professions, right? And so it takes somebody to really believe in you and what you're doing. And so I can definitely relate to you there.
Yeah, fortunately, she didn't have to sell me too hard to her parents, because, imagine, you're introducing, but this is Tom, my new boyfriend, and he wants to be a cartoonist and draw when he grows, for a living. And that probably wouldn't go over real well with most in-laws, or potential in-laws. But fortunately, my wife dated a lot of rock musicians prior to me. So I was like normal city boy, I was like, boy, this guy might actually have a job where he has to sit at a desk and do something.
Yeah.
So I had a free pass there. I didn't play guitar in a local rock band, so I was already on the good side of the in-laws.
But pretty tame by comparison.
Exactly.
And I have to ask, I'm sure anyone who's following along on YouTube has noticed some of your Batman collection behind you. If that has prime real estate in your office, that you must be a pretty big fan.
Now, Batman kind of was what got me started on this path as a graphic storyteller, illustrator, visual artist. When I was a kid, I was fascinated by Batman, and I mean a little kid. When I was 2, my parents tell the story about how I knocked over the TV watching the Batman TV show, jumping around with a towel wrapped around my neck as a cape. So, and then I started drawing comics, and I loved drawing Batman, and then eventually segued into everything else. So I have Batman to thank. That is an actual costume, by the way. I used to wear it taking my kids trick-or-treating around the neighborhood. And they'd all get candy, and the adults would look at me as I was standing there, and then they would bring me a beer. So I had a pillowcase full of beer by the end of the night. So it was a kind of a win-win.
That's awesome. And that looks pretty movie quality. I mean, I know
yeah.
We're just seeing it in the background, but that looks pretty legit.
Yeah, no, that's that I actually got that. I've had this for about 20 years. I got involved with a bunch of guys that made movie props, and they made movie props professionally, but they were also geeks, so they made like movie quality props from other movies, and it was a whole like little subculture, and they would get in fierce arguments about the movie accuracy of this or that, and they were like little fiefdoms that this guy's gloves are crap, they don't have the right fin length and all this stuff. They were crazy, and I bought like the gloves from this guy, and I had this guy make the armor for me, and I got the cape from this guy, so I've kind of pieced it together. And cool. But it's the Val Kilmer version, not the Sonar one with the weird fins, but the first one early in the movie, which was one of my favorite of the Batman movie outfits at that point, nipples aside.
That's the title of this episode now, nipples aside.
So
well, you answered one of my questions.
Looking at some of your so I don't know if it was on YouTube or Maybe it was on your website. I don't remember. I think it was on your website. I saw a leather jacket with the Val Kilmer Batman airbrush that you airbrushed on the back of this leather jacket. And you had mentioned that you had hung on to that jacket all of these years from your airbrushing days.
Yeah.
And you're big on Batman. Like you have, if you're just listening to this podcast, he has a lot of Batman stuff behind him, more than just the life-size costume. But so specifically, would you say Val Kilmer is your favorite Batman? Do you have a favorite Batman? Do you love them all?
No, I do not love them all.
Okay.
Val Kilmer was okay. My favorite Batman is probably actually Ben Affleck.
No.
I wish I would have seen him with a little bit better material to work with, a better story. I just thought that he really, especially as in the older kind of war-weary Batman that they tried to portray him as, I thought he was great at it, and I thought he would have been really good if he would have had a good movie, a really good story to do. Yeah. And then Kilmer was okay. I thought he was a pretty good Bruce Wayne. He wasn't tough enough looking. He didn't have a big enough physique. It's like there's a scene in that movie where Chris O'Donnell, Dick Grayson is giving him some lip about something or another. And then he says, oh, who's going to, Robin says, well, if I want to do that, who's going to stop me? And Val Kilmer stands up and goes, I am. And it's like, he's a scrawny little dude. You're looking at him going, dude, you couldn't beat up Chris O'Donnell, let alone the Joker. Come on, man. Hit the weights a little bit.
Your way up to that.
Yeah. So that he looks good in the suit, of course, everybody does. But he needed to hit the weights a little bit harder for that role, I think.
It feels like the common criticism of Pierce Brosnan as Bond too. Like he just isn't, he's not quite the tough edge. But I think I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was discussing at a family thing not long ago. There's playing somebody as Batman and playing Bruce Wayne, and those are almost two parts. And you almost have to compare it, because George Clooney gets a lot of crap for his Batman, but I think he played the Bruce Wayne part. Like I liked him in the Bruce Wayne part maybe better than in the Batman costume.
Yeah, I'd agree. I also think that of Michael Keaton. A lot of people love Michael Keaton's Batman. I thought Michael Keaton wasn't a very good Batman for the same reason. First of all, he's like 5'9", and he weighs $110, but he was a great Bruce Wayne, but I don't know about him as Batman. And I get that Tim Burton's whole thing was he's Batman because he's obsessed and he's really rich, and it doesn't matter that he's like a physical specimen, but come on.
He was one of the first heroes that I was drawn to for that reason. I liked that he didn't have any powers. And so you could almost say, if I had the money, I could be Batman, right? Like if I had the money, I could create the gadgets and I could be Batman. And so that's kind of why I liked him. But DC's storytelling in terms of like its films, I never felt was as strong. And then sort of started relating more to Spider-Man. And even though he had powers, I was like, he's just a kid with pimples who's nervous around girls, and that made him feel relatable to me. But anyway, yeah, you know what you're talking about when it comes to the physique of the Batman as a bodybuilder yourself. So
I try.
So let's go back to being introduced to the potential future in-laws. When they said, well, we're glad he's not a rocker. Maybe he'll get a desk job doing this cartooning thing. The industry has changed a lot since those days where publications or companies would have in-house illustrators that would get to set up big desks of all their utensils and tools of the trade. So because we got to hit on the mad stuff a little bit, just kind of talk about your time there, and then how the media, print media landscape is changing, especially as it relates to humorous print and stuff like that.
Yeah, that business has changed a lot. Even when I started, and I probably really started as an illustrator in the late 80s or right around 1990, there were no like the big studio houses and stuff were going away at that point too. There was a time where you would have studio houses. Like there was a pretty famous one in Minneapolis called Studio One, and there were a lot of illustrators that worked in there, and a lot of them had different expertise, or different places that their style fit. And they had two cartoonists there. One guy was named George Carn, and he did a lot of work for like General Mills. He worked on the Count Chocula and Boo Berry and all those kinds of characters and that sort of thing. And I remember visiting that studio when I was in college, and we stopped off over there, and I thought, wow, this is exactly the place I'd like to be, like surrounded by other artists, and you go into work and it's a total creative environment and stuff. And by the time I got out, that studio was done, and there wasn't anything like that anymore, and it was all freelance by then. And so fortunately, I kind of fell into an area of expertise that was very marketable, and that was caricature. And I totally fell into that. Like I had no ambition. When I went to college, I was like, I'm going to be a caricature artist. I didn't even know what that was. I got a job doing caricatures at a theme park. That was my summer job when I went to college. And that first summer, I worked with a bunch of other artists that were really good. And I couldn't believe how good these guys were. They did, the caricatures, but they also did other kinds of art that really blew me away. And I thought, well, this caricature thing might be something I could do to pay the bills, while I'm trying to figure out what else I want to do. And it kind of did work out that way, because not only did I do caricatures to pay my way through college doing them at these theme parks, but I opened my own theme park operations and concession operations. And for a long time, I had a bunch of them, and they paid my bills, and I was able to then kind of get into the freelance world and try to find places where I could get published without having to worry about how to pay the rent. So that really worked out well. And I still do live caricature, but not very often. I do still have two theme park operations that I run or own. And it's fun, but I did it full time really for 25 years, or about 25 years. So I had a belly full of it, man. I mean, when I go do it again, I always have fun, but if I have to think about, boy, I got to draw 3 days this week, I'm just like, oh man, I don't know if I want to do that.
But I love what you said about I can sort of count on it to pay the bills. I'll fall back on this way to make income. It was you, Dylan, who told me at some point in my 20s, because I didn't even realize this, with a Dixon Marquette marker and a ream of paper, you could go crank out a couple hundred caricatures for some good money at a town square somewhere. And it was Dylan who said to me, Corey, not everybody has something like that they can do. Like if they just want some quick cash or some side money or whatever to supplement. And so that's kind of how I always looked at it. I was like, well, I could always do this. I could always just go sit somewhere at a restaurant or at a busy mall or something and go crank out some caricatures. I think it's funny that we share that sort of idea, or that realization early on that it was something that you could do, and then it sometimes takes off more than you think it will.
Well, the fact that I got good at caricature really, I what I found was that was a very marketable thing in the publishing world. Because when people ask me about caricature and illustration, and I always say it's one of the best tools you can have in your toolbox, because almost every media story is ultimately about people. So if you can draw people or depict people in a way that's better than a photograph or different than a photograph or more expressive than a photograph, that's something people are going to want. So that really helped me a lot, because I specialized in that, and I got a lot of jobs because people would say, oh, well, I need somebody that can do a caricature, and this guy can do it,
Yeah.
So I did a lot of work early on, while I did a bunch of comic book work for a small company out of Chicago called Now Comics. That was like my first real publishing job in publishing. And it was a comic book called Married with Children, which was the Fox TV show, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I did that for, I don't know, 4 years, I think. I did 25, 30, 40 issues of that. I can't remember how many. But that was fun, and I got that job because I could make it look like them.
Yeah.
You know, so that was one, and then that led to another job, another comics job for Marvel. I did a miniseries called The Coneheads, and that was like a sequel of the movie, you know, Coneheads movie. This was like a continuation of that story, which was really fun. It was only a 4-issue gig, and I never did another thing for Marvel after that. They didn't have too many caricature gigs there, you know.
Yeah.
But Marie Severin inked that for me, and so that was really exciting. And so that was a fun job. And then I would get, you know, do stuff for do politicians for magazines, and you know, celebrities for this and that. And so that really helped me out a lot. Being able to specialize in caricature was a really good tool to have. And don't get me wrong, I don't diss or badmouth live caricature work. I mean, it's a great art form. I've seen some artists that do that will blow your mind. And it's like, how do they do that in like 5 minutes? You know, there's no net, you know, it's all, it's fun, you know, drawn by the seat of your pants. That's what's exciting about it. And it's one of the things that I do kind of miss, is drawing like that, where you don't have time to think about it or sketch it out. You just go in there. It's what I call reflective drawing. It's like, you don't have time to analyze it. It's in through your eyeballs, out through your hands. And there's a natural quality to that you just can't capture by, you know, studying and noodling around and sketching and erasing. And so that's really quite amazing. And when I do it, I still like to do it. Like I said, I always have fun, but it's just not something I do a lot of these days.
So how does that pivot to Mad? I know, I mean, anybody can go to your site and check out your bio, which is hilariously written, by the way. That's so great.
Thanks.
But I know you had tried a couple times to get in there, and then finally did, and became one of the usual Gang of Idiots, and worked with some amazing people, the original Gang of Idiots, and Mort Drucker and those guys. So tell us a little bit about your time there, and then maybe we'll catch a break and then get on with the second half of the episode.
Okay. Well, yeah, when I got that job doing caricatures, I was actually going to college in Minneapolis or St. Paul, and I got a job with a company that also did caricatures at a local theme park in the Twin Cities, but they also had an operation in Chicago at Great America. And they didn't have any spots in Minnesota available, but they did have one in Chicago that opened up. So I moved down to Chicago for the summer, and I worked with a bunch of artists, and we all lived together in this big townhouse apartment. And I had used to read Mad when I was a kid, like, you know, 4th, 5th grade. My buddy down the street had a subscription, and every time it would come in, I'd run over there and we'd read it, you know, and laugh at the parody of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Like, you know, I wasn't going to see that movie for another 10 years probably, but still loved it. Loved Don Martin, loved everything about Mad. We draw our own parodies of this and that. And then I got away from it for a long time. And, you know, started reading, like, you know, superhero stuff. Star Wars came out. I was pretty big into Star Wars when that was out. And then when I moved down to that townhouse, and all these guys had big stacks of Mad magazine with them. They were laying all over the apartment, and I was looking at them going, oh my God, was the artwork this good in this magazine when I was reading it when I was, you know, 11? And sure enough, you know, here's an issue I remember having, and I was like, wow, this Jack Davis guy is not just a good cartoonist, he's like a legend. And that kind of turned me back onto Mad, and I'm like, you know what, I'd like to work for these guys. But at that time, Mad was a totally closed shop. Well, two things were against me. One, Mad was a totally closed shop. Two, I sucked and had no chance of working for Mad Magazine. I had a lot of years of growing and getting better in front of me before that was going to happen. But many, many years later, I did start sending my work to them. That's kind of a long story. I did a little work for Cracked magazine, the Mad ripoff, for a brief time. Then I finally got a chance to be in the magazine. And the thing was, so this was like in mid 2000, by like June 2000, I had my first job with them. And I feel like really lucky in that I might be one of the last freelancers that got into Mad when it was still kind of the Bill Gaines Mad, you know, because Nick Meglin was still an editor there. He'd been with them since like 1958 or something like that, or 57. John Ficara was editing. He'd been editing for 30 years. All these guys worked with Bill Gaines before he passed away. And so it was still very much the old school Mad, you know? And so that I was really lucky, especially getting to be there while Nick Meglin was there. I mean, he really was Mad Magazine incarnate. And so I felt like I got in it right at the end of that era.
Yeah.
And I had a blast working for him for over 20 years. But I learned a lot, you know. I grew as an artist, and those guys taught me a lot about humor and, you know, selling a gag and you know, pacing and all sorts of things. It was like a huge education working for him too. So it was great. I was really, really lucky to be a part of that group.
How did that feel after all those years, you know, being a kid and enjoying the spoofs? I know for us, for Dylan and I, we grew up in a town of 3,000 people, mostly farmers. We didn't have cable or the internet yet. So if you wanted to learn about pop culture or what was going on, you had to literally, I mean, it sounds like the 50s, but you had to go to the drugstore and get a Mad magazine and like see what comedy was, because we weren't allowed to stay up late and watch SNL. So there was no other way to get like current event, pop culture, entertainment, comedy stuff. And I remember going to Gartner's Drugs and Pepper's drugstores to get Mad magazine. So how did that feel to like finally find yourself there sitting with some of your heroes and guys that you had followed for all those years, and now be, like you said, it's that rising tide that raises all boats. They're making you better, they're teaching you, and you're just swimming in a sea of all of that awesomeness.
Yeah, I threw a party. Like when my first issue came out, and we had a big, huge party at my house.
That's
I mean,
awesome.
for all I knew, it was the only issue I'd ever be in, you know? So I just was so excited about being a part of that and having my work in Mad and my name in Mad, and Mort Drucker was in that issue, and Angela Torres was in that issue, and, you know, George Woodbridge was gone by then. I think Rick Tulka had a piece in that one. I'd have to look back and see, but yeah, I mean, it was surreal to see my work in between all these guys who I had grown up reading and thinking that, well, they were incredible. So that was tough. Every issue that came out, I would be excited.
That's awesome.
That I was in. So that was the greatest. But the best part was getting to know these people, you know, and being friends with them. You know, I got to spend a reasonably significant amount of time with some of these guys because of the Cartoonist Society. So at least every year we'd get together, and then I would go to New York for their holiday party, and we'd hang out. And, you know, I got to correspond with a lot of them. I got to be pretty good friends with Al Jaffe. Jack Davis and his wife Dina were the first people we met at a Reuben Awards.
Oh my gosh.
That was crazy. That was before I worked for Mad. Like I became an NCS member in 1999, and it was part of the reason I got into Mad really was the NCS, because Nick Meglin was a member and Sam Viviano was a member, and I got to show him my stuff while we were at the Reubens, and, you know, so that was instrumental. But the first Rubens I went to, the Reuben Awards, if nobody knows what that is the National Cartoon Society every year has an awards banquet weekend. Yeah, so my first Rubens was in '99 in San Antonio, and the first person I met was Jack Davis and his wife Dina, and we're just walking into the lobby, and they're standing right there, and I looked up and I was like, oh my God, that's Jack Davis. Oh my God, that's Jack Davis. And Dina saw us and she walked up. She said, hi, I'm Dina Davis, and this is my husband, Jack. Are you guys new? And they were just the sweetest Southern people. And so we chatted with them forever. And Jack was a good friend for many years, and he was one of my idols and one of the first people I got to meet when I went there. So,
did you feel like Chris Farley meeting Paul McCartney like I do? Right
yeah,
now?
I sure did. Yeah. In fact, I got an even crazier story about that Rubens if you want to hear it.
I would love to.
So we live in Minneapolis, right, or the Minnesota Twin Cities, and Charles Schultz is from here, and don't get much more famous than Charles Schultz.
No.
And so we went to this Rubens, and he was there. He was a very prominent member of the NCS, and they had a big icebreaker at like an icebreaker, party and little buffet dinner and stuff right in the front of the Alamo. Our hotel was right next to the Alamo. So we're right in front of the Alamo, and it's all roped off and it's all cartoonist. You had to get a badge to get in there. And so my wife and I are sitting in this bench kind of at one end of this group, and we're eating, and I'm pointing out, that's Jack Davis. There's Jack Davis again. That's Jeff McNally, that's Will Eisner, and I'm just like geeking out and pointing all those people. And see that guy way over there in the buffet with the like loud Cosby sweater on? That's Charles Schultz. She's like, wow, we got married like a mile away from where he grew up as a kid in St. Paul. And so Sparky's like, his nickname is Sparky. Everybody called him Sparky. So he's standing there with this plate and he's looking around for a place to sit. And there was a empty space on the bench right next to my wife. And we're like 50 yards away from him. And between us is probably 100 big time cartoonists that are like legendary. And, I mean, you can't even name them all. And he starts walking over towards us. And my wife says, he's not going to sit down next to us, is he? And I said, are you kidding me? Everybody here knows him. He's going to get stopped. It's not beeline, sat right down next to my wife, says, hi, I'm Sparky. And I'm like, hamna. And we just had a nice conversation, talked about St. Paul and the area where he grew up, and asked me what I did. The guy he refused to talk about himself pretty much. He just would like to know what you did and talk about the event and everything. And that was amazing.
That's so cool. And you're like, do you remember when you drew Snoopy? That was awesome.
Yeah. I think Chris Farley was in high school when I was, when I met him there. So that was pre Farley days. But yeah, so the NCS was great, and going to the Rubens was great, and working for MAD was great. I've been very lucky.
That's very cool.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll have more with Tom Richmond after a quick word from one of the members of the Odd Pods Media Network.
Hey, this is Russ.
This is Kyle.
This is Michelle.
From the Infectious Groove Podcast. Join us every Monday for the most fun you can have with a music podcast. The Infectious Groove Podcast uses a positive and fun approach as we take time every week to share our jammy jams, then dig into a thought-provoking topic discussing all decades and genres of music. You can find the Infectious Groove Podcast on all major podcast platforms, or you can head to infectiousgroovepodcast.com to find us there and subscribe. We might have a controversial opinion here or there, but we always have fun with it.
Oh, I'm sure I'll say something dumb.
Subscribe to the Infectious Groove Podcast, part of the Odd Pods Media Network.
I was watching one of your videos on YouTube, and you're talking a little bit about the work that you would do for MAD, and you never had time to watch much TV or movies, but you'd have to absorb all this content, rather quickly to be able to do the work you're doing. As the resident idiot, I'll ask for my benefit and anyone else who is curious. What was that process like, binging, trying to binge these shows or movies? And what are you looking for as you're absorbing all this content? Because you've got to characterize everything. You've got to turn it all into huge spreads. What was that process like for you? What were you noticing? And did you find any new favorite movies and TV shows out of it?
Yeah. Well, it was a lot easier to do movies, I thought, because you only had to watch a movie, a couple hours max, right? And I would watch it a few times. But TV shows, man, I'd have to watch at least a whole season of something just to get the show. What I would look for is, what are the characters like? How can I make fun of these people? What's the plotting and pacing? What are the environments like? But I just would try to absorb the show, and so I could come up with what they call chicken fat, which are little visual gags in the background and little things that you would do to make fun of the show. For example, I watched this show that I had to do a parody of, Law and Order: Criminal Intent, back when Vincent D'Onofrio was in it, right? So he was the lead, and I can't remember the name of the lady, the really short lady that was his partner, and can't remember the name of the actress. But Vincent D'Onofrio did all this crazy body language stuff, and he would talk to people, and he'd like lean way over to the side and get like really close to him and talk to him and stuff. And he was always doing this leaning stuff. And I noticed that. And so the entire parody, he is never standing up straight. He's always leaning sideways like this. And what was the best about it was that his partner was so short that she would be standing there, and he would be like leaning, he'd stand on one side and his head would be on the other side of her when he was talking to her. And it's stuff like that I look for, that I can then make fun of visually throughout the whole piece and make it a running gag. So that's kind of it. And then when it comes to films, because TV shows, at least, they used to be mostly sets, so it was kind of easy to get the visuals with that. But with movies, they have very visual identities. So some movies are really colorful, and some have a really bland palette, and some are dark and noir looking, and some are really bright. So I would pay attention to that stuff too. So if I had to do a movie that was a really dark type film, I would use a lot more, blacks and big dark areas, and a lot more contrast and shadows. And so those were the kind of things I would look for. But yeah, sometimes some of the research would be crazy with some of the stuff. And I would have to ask friends too that I knew were into shows, that I didn't have time to watch like 6 seasons of anything, so I would say, so is there anything that happened in the show that, would be fun to call back in the visuals or whatever? I remember we did a parody of a reality show called Trading Spaces. And one of the designers or whatever, her name was Genevieve. I don't remember her last name, but one of my neighbors loved that show, and they said, oh, when you draw Genevieve, don't have her wearing shoes. She's always barefoot whenever she's in these shows for some reason. She like running around people's houses, and she's always barefoot. So I had a lot of fun with that. I gave her these big flappy Gollum feet, and she'd always have like little flies kind of flying around them and everything. So little things like that are fun.
That's interesting. I never really thought about that on the TV side of it, but like very rarely are all the characters of a TV show in one episode. And it's so much more about just capturing the likeness. I mean, the mannerisms like you described, or like if you were doing something like Jim Carrey, I mean, he's got 1,000 faces and his body's all over the place. So it makes sense that you would have to consume a fair amount of that to be able to throw in all those little nods to the show to really show that care and attention that you put into it.
Yeah, and it's easier one of the questions people ask me all the time, and I do like this question, so I'll ask it to myself and then I'll answer it, is they say, would you rather do a parody of a TV show or movie that you hate, or a TV show or movie that you love? And the answer to that is yes. because if you have any emotional reaction to it at all, it makes it fun,
Yeah.
So if I happen to love a show, then I really get into it, and I learn the characters, and then you can make fun of things you love. I mean, that's there's no problem there, but I understand it. I really I can consume it easier. If I really hate the show, then at least I get to, blast it and make a lot of fun of it. So, but if it's really boring and there's just nothing to it, that's when I kind of go, oh man.
Yeah.
So I did, some of my favorite shows I did. I loved doing Mad Men. That was a great show to do. Stranger Things was one of the more recent ones I did that I really dug. And then I really hate This Is Us. And I had to do that show. Fortunately, my wife loves This Is Us, so I had to suffer through the whole first season with her on that one. And just isn't my bag, but yeah, so I got to make fun of it, and I got to lean on her a little bit for some of the insider gags,
That's great.
But yeah, and I liked Lost. That was another one that I enjoyed doing.
I felt like I could tell you liked Lost because your Lost caricatures are some of my favorites.
Oh, thanks.
Those black and white sketches. I mean, Sawyer especially was one of my favorites in that series we'd done. He just got that smolder face, man. Cool. So
that was a fun one.
As it relates to like we said, the print media landscape, I'm going to steal Kendall's question. So what do you think that looks like in terms of, how that industry's kind of been disrupted, and maybe how they're going to appeal to a younger audience? And then that kind of segues into your Claptrap project about sort of the way that industry's going and what you guys are doing, as Matt is no longer doing some of these parody things.
Well, yeah, the print industry's been going downhill for a number of years. People want to blame the internet on it, but it actually was starting to decline before the internet became the mass, media consumption empire it is. But the bottom line with illustration and print media is there are fewer magazines or fewer publications, and so therefore less work, and they don't have as big a budgets as they used to. And it's mostly about where advertising went. That's kind of it, where eyeballs stopped looking at magazines and they are looking elsewhere now, and advertisers went to the elsewhere, and the magazines don't have the ad revenues to do what they did. So, but there's still plenty of media, there's still a lot, people still want to find out about, pop culture and news and all that kind of stuff. So it's just a matter of figuring out how what I do fits into that, And the big problem, of course, is monetizing the internet. Everybody consumes for free now. Paying, for a newspaper is inconceivable for most people under the age of 30. I mean, they're like, well, I get all that on for free. Why would I have somebody throw that on my doorstep? And they don't quite get that while you were paying for that newspaper and all those advertisements from there, people were making a living doing that, and therefore there was professional versions of that. Now is a lot less of that these days. There's a lot of stuff to consume, but a lot of it is not so great. And because people are really, it's tough to make money doing it. So, but it's been a challenge to try to figure out how to find new revenue streams for, humorous illustration and cartooning. I know a lot of people have turned to books, and books are still a thing. People still buy books, and if you can, produce books and illustrate books and stuff, there's a market for that kind of thing now. A lot of cartoonist friends of mine that used to do comic strips, right? They're not, that business too is really failing because newspapers are failing, and there's no more Garfields out there. There's no more Bloom counties. Now everything's moved to the internet, and figuring out how to monetize it is the big thing. But a lot of them have gone to doing these YA books, these young adult books that are just like little paperback sort of things. Kind of the big pioneer for that was probably the Wimpy Kid, right? Jeff Kinney, where they're sort of half illustrated, half written, kind of, and so many of the people I know are big into that right now. The guy who did Pearls Before Swine, Stefan Pastis, who was one of our USO buddies that Paul and I went to a lot of trips with. He still does Pearls Before Swine, but he's been doing these Timmy failure books, and they made a movie out of it, and that's his main focus now. Yep. So that's kind of what you got to do. You got to find someplace else to go to do your stuff, and I've been doing all sorts of different things for the last few years. I started doing these caricature workshops where I travel around the world, and I have these, and I do these classes and teach caricature. I wrote my book, the mad art of caricature. I started my website in about 15 years ago now, and I've been building an audience there for a long time with my blog and everything. And now I produce a lot of self-published stuff that I sell to my audience, so sketchbooks and prints and that sort of thing. And now we're doing this. I did my first crowdsourced project this fall, and since Mad stopped doing movie and TV parodies, and now pretty much stopped doing everything, one of the Mad writers, Desmond Devlin, and I decided we wanted to keep the movie parody genre alive. So we conceived this book, and we crowdsourced it and crowdfunded it and reached our goal, and now we're busy working on it, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
We did a little prep call, Tom and I, and you said that you were originally maybe not too excited about this crowdfunding thing and didn't know what it was all about, and then it just took off, which speaks to a couple things. One, you've built like you said, you're really consistent with your blog and your website, so you've built a following there. So now there's something that you can turn around and offer to that audience. And as a Star Wars fan, I loved it because the last Star Wars film was never covered in parody form. You guys are going to cover that. And so really excited about that as well. So that's awesome. I love how, you've stayed willing to reinvent yourself. I think it's a Will Rogers quote that I quote often, which is, even if we're on the right road, we'll get run over if we stand still. So, there's a willingness to always be reinventing yourselves and sort of looking around the corner to see what might be next and what opportunities might be there. So good for us that you've stayed willing to do that, because that just means that we just get to keep looking at your stuff and supporting you in that way. So I think that's awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, it's been the crowdsourcing thing was quite an adventure, and one of the things I didn't like about it was that it was too, I had a little bit of a problem supporting a lot of crowdsourced stuff, because who knows if I'd ever get this thing, And I heard so many horror stories about people doing it, doing this big thing, and then it took them 10 years to do their project or some ridiculous thing like that, or they never did it. But Des and I talked about it, and we're like, look, we've got a long track record of producing this exact sort of work under deadlines. Des was with Mad for over 30 years. I was with Mad for over 20 years. I never missed a deadline. I don't think Des ever missed one. So I thought we had a little bit of we had some clout, where we could say, look, we are going to produce this book and you are going to get it. And be able to say that and say, look, people really ought to believe that, because, we've been doing it for decades. Yeah. So I wasn't afraid to throw myself out there like that. But that was probably my biggest fear, was that I just thought people would think, hey, maybe this guy's never going to do it,
Yeah.
But enough people said, yeah, we think we got faith in you. And so now we're working like fiends trying to get it done, because we ended up doing 12 parodies, and that in what's going to end up being about 9, maybe 10 months of time. That's a lot of work, boy. These are some pretty intense projects. And also Des writes a lot of words. So I'm going to have like the shortest one he's written so far is 7 pages, I think. That would be a long one in Mad. And we've done 2 9-pagers and an 8-pager already. So I'm like, dude, why don't we do a short movie? Like, what's the shortest movie there is? Something that's about 58 minutes. But that's the other fun thing about that project was we did the Star Wars movie, right? The Rise of Skywalker, and that was always going to be the first one we did because Mad didn't do it, and we were big fans of the Star Wars parodies. Harry North did the first one, and Mort did the next 5, and Herman Mejia did the prequels, and I think Mort did the first. He might have done the first 2 prequels. Yeah, he did the first 2 prequels, and I think Herman did the last one. But we thought it was a real shame that they never finished their parody, trilogy.
Yeah.
And so we did it. And we did that one on spec. Right? Like we had that one done pretty much before we had this thing crowdfunded. So if we did reach our goal, we still would have had the Star Wars parody done.
Yeah.
But so then we thought, well, let's do, because we only wanted to do movies. So we thought, well, let's do a combination of like new movies, a few new movies, and then some classics that Mad never did.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a good idea. So we were ready to do that. Then 2020 happened. And there weren't any new movies.
Yeah.
So we're like, so now what are we going to do? Let's just do classics. So we're doing all these movies that Mad never did, there's quite a long list of really great movies that you would think, wow, Mad must have done this movie. And they didn't, So we're doing The Shawshank Redemption.
One of my favorites.
Yeah. And Blade Runner.
Nice.
And some of the other ones that we're doing. Well, we allowed some tiers of our crowdsourcing people to vote, to nominate and vote on movies. So the 3 that they chose was the ones that they chose were The Princess Bride, Citizen Kane, and The Blues Brothers.
Nice.
And then we chose Star Wars, Blade Runner, The Shawshank Redemption, and Psycho.
Oh, cool.
And then we had a tier where there was the super tier, right? Only for like the Daddy Warbucks types. And they one of those that they got to pick the parody and they get all the art and everything.
Oh, wow.
So Toy Story 4 is one of the movies we're doing for that one. And if that one seems weird, the reason we're doing it is because the director of Toy Story 4, Josh Cooley's the one that bought that. So we're doing his movie.
That's great.
And actually the other one, Psycho, is the other one of those, but we had already kind of thought we're going to do Psycho anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
And so we have one more that we still have to spring on people that we decided we were going to pick it. And I'm bringing up my list because I know I'm spacing one out. Oh, The Big Lebowski and Goodfellas.
Oh my
gosh. Those are the other 2. Yeah, and Toys and Unforgiven. So those are all the other movies, and then we got one more that we've picked out, and we're gonna announce it pretty soon here. Des wants to hold it in his back pocket for a while yet.
Of course.
Yeah, we got to tell people this one. But it's a good one.
You don't want to unveil it here on From the Middle. There's like 12 people that would be really excited. No, I'm
Des will kill me.
I have to ask. That's a heck of a list. Are there any that you've done so far that have been your favorite or you were most excited to work on from that list?
Blade Runner was the one I insisted that we do. I was like, I'm not doing it if we don't do Blade Runner, because That's my all-time favorite sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
And I still can't believe Matt didn't do it.
That is surprising.
But you know what? Sometimes it depends on a bunch of factors as to why they didn't. Like, you know, the reason they didn't do Shawshank was because one, it really wasn't a big box office hit. It actually was kind of a disappointment at the box office, although it ended up getting nominated for a ton of Oscars and other awards. But Pulp Fiction came out at exactly the same time. And that was a huge buzz, you know, that people were going ape shit over Pulp Fiction. So they did Pulp Fiction instead. And then by the time they would have gotten around to doing Shawshank, it had already been long gone out of the theaters and everything. So that was the reason they missed that one. So a lot of times it's timing, you know. Another huge movie came out at exactly the same time and they went with that movie instead. And then it was too late to do the other movies.
Yeah.
You know, because it takes forever to do one of these. And by the time you write it and get it drawn and it's in print, it's like 3-month process, you know.
Yeah.
So if they don't pick the right movie, you know, nobody's going to care about it when the parody comes out.
Yeah.
So they got to stick with movies that are kind of, especially these days, because back in the day, movies were in theaters for 6 months, you know, or sometimes a year. They would trickle down from New York to Denver to, you know, the La Crosse to Timbuktu, and it was still in theaters and people were still watching it. And nowadays it's like on 3,000 screens, and 3 weeks later it's toast.
Yep.
And you're on to the next big movie event. So that's the other thing I was excited about, doing movies like Unforgiven and Goodfellas. You know, these are great dramas, and Matt didn't do a whole lot of those in its last, you know, later days. We were mostly doing, you know, the big blockbuster event type movies just because they wanted them to be ones that were going to sell the magazine even 3 or 4 months after the movie came out, you know.
Right.
So I used to joke that if a movie didn't have a cape, a wand, an alien in it, then we wouldn't be doing a parody of it.
That's
so
great.
I'm very curious about the relationship and the process between writer and illustrator. So you and Desmond are breaking off together, and you're doing the Claptrap book, and so what I'm wondering is when you go and when you do that with him, when you sit down and you decide that we're going to be doing the next Star Wars movie, I'm picturing like a whole big storyboard, a dialogue, a relationship between you and him. In part because I think the nature of what you're doing is that there are jokes and there's tongue-in-cheek things where you have to have the words, but then like the other half of it is in the picture, and you can't necessarily do one without the other. The joke doesn't play right without the other, if it plays at all. And so I guess I'm making some assumptions there, but so is that like a start to finish collaborative effort that you guys are deciding together what's going to happen, what's going to be said versus what's going to be shown, or is it a writer starts the race and then passes a baton off to an illustrator? What does that whole dynamic look like, and how important is that collaborative relationship?
Well, it's very much the latter of what you just described. Yeah, we don't like have you know, creative meetings where we talk about which scenes we think we should do and all that stuff. Is Des writes the script and delivers it to me, and then I pick it up from there. I like your analogy of the baton, and at that point there's some back and forth. Now, when we worked at MAD, we never talked. Like, I never talked to the writer. Wow. We had zero communication in the process. If I had a question about the script, if something didn't make sense to me, if I was reading this gag and I was like, this does not make any sense. The story is this, it's like, or this scene happened before this scene or something like that. I would have to call my art director, Sam, and I'd say, look, I don't get this. Why is this? Or you got to explain this to me because I'm not figuring out how to sell this gag. Then if he had to, he would go back to Des. So we had an intermediary basically. And really the probably the biggest reason for that is that the editors at Mad were very much wanted to be in control of everything. So they did not want us collaborating behind the scenes about doing something and then springing it on them. They wanted to see what was happening, and we had to send in. Des had to send in the script, and they'd send it back for rewrites, and they'd edit him. And then I would, have to send in pencils and get my visual gags approved and stuff. So they definitely had the reins when it came to that. Now they're out of the picture, right? So it's just me and Des, but we're still keeping it separate in that he starts it and then I finish it, but we now communicate. So he will occasionally send me, like when he's working on a script, he'll call me and say, hey, I'm thinking about this scene and I'm wondering if I can, if I should handle it this way or this way, what do you think? And I might give him some ideas. He probably won't listen to me and just do whatever he wants anyway, but at least he gave me a little bit of a nod there. And then I would get his script, and then I would start doing my thing. And and my job is to sell his gags and also to do my own kind of visual gags. And Des would recommend visual gags. He would say, hey, it would be funny if you drew, this guy in the background or something. And but just like, I wouldn't call him up and say, hey, you know what, you should rewrite this joke because I think, or this joke is no good. Why don't you put this joke in there instead? I could take his advice if he wants to suggest a visual gag, and I might do it. If I decide I want to ignore it, I just ignore it. If I wanted to write my own gag, I write my own gag. But I send him then my pencils and he sends me his scripts. So we do kind of play off each other once we get the work together. Mm-hmm. So I might suggest to him, hey, this scene would work better if we did this visually. And he might, say, sometimes he'll say, yeah, that's really great. Sometimes he'd be like, boy, we go back and forth and kind of argue about it. And if one of us could convince the other one to do it, then that'd be great. And sometimes he'd just be adamant and say, look, that does not make any sense. We've got to do it this way. And I'd be like, okay. So it's much more of a collaborative effort now. We have no editor. Right. So Des has to edit himself, which he's done a very good job of. I was worried he was going to send me like, a 9-pound manuscript with everything, but he's done a great job of, I think, really picking good jokes, and probably he's left a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor on his end. And then I have to do all the layouts and, and design work and all that stuff that used to be done by the art department. So it's a lot more work to do it this way.
That's fascinating.
That is a very interesting answer. It sounds like almost like a slow burn riffing off of each other. Just because there's so many of instances where it was like you have the words and there's a joke there, but the joke was made so much funnier because the two guys were riding on a horse together or something.
Right.
And to think that like that wasn't necessarily done collaboratively, but it was instead one riff off of someone else's joke, is cool. And also I think testament to what visual art can do is it can plant emotion, it can plant humor, all by itself. And
that's called selling the gag.
Yeah.
Right. So that's job. Well, I got a lot of jobs doing these movie parody art. So Sam Viviano did it for years before he became an art director. He did movie and TV parodies for Mad for 20 years. He used to liken it to juggling. It's like you had to keep all these balls in the air when you do these parodies. One is you got to do comic book storytelling. so move the eye around the panel, that whole thing, or move the eye around the page, panel to panel. Then you've got to do selling the gag. So the writer's written a gag that's a joke that's in the words, and the artist's job is to do a visual that reinforces that joke, makes that joke a little funnier, maybe, adds something to that joke, whatever it is, really selling that gag. Then there's the caricatures, of course. You got to draw caricatures of all these people, make them recognizable from all these different angles and all these different expressions and everything. And then you got to do the chicken fat. That's the background gags and all the little stuff that's in the background, and the nods to the show, the non sequitur cameos, the little signs in the background saying something dumb or whatever. And those are all parts of that, all parts of the flavor of the soup that you're putting together. And it doesn't work very good if all those parts aren't mixed together well. So, but Des is very good at writing visually. Like, I think he's got a good head for understanding what would work visually for a panel. So he'll write gags that are right in my wheelhouse. Like, I'll read this panel and I'm instantly go, I know exactly how to draw this one. And I think he probably had that in his head, because it's when you're writing, he sees the characters interacting and how I can use expression to really make it funny. So that makes my job easier, because I just get excited about working on his stuff. And a lot of the visual gags he suggests are really funny too. So I actually very seldom refuse to do the ones he suggests, because they're usually pretty good. Sometimes I get mad at him because he wrote a visual gag that I was planning on doing all along, and I'm like, oh, now you get credit for this one.
You're gonna think I didn't think of that.
Yeah, exactly. So I got kind of mad at him when we did the Aquaman parody, because I yelled at him. I said, stop suggesting all these gags, because I was going to do that gag. One of them was, every time Aquaman was being drawn, I needed to draw different tattoos on him with different gags on him, so
that's good.
Like Charlie the Tuna or something like that. And I had been planning that all along, and now I'm like, oh man, now you get credit for that, for thinking of that. And he goes, no, you thought of it too. But so we work well together in that. I think we have similar senses of humor and similar visions that kind of, at least they mesh together well.
Yeah, it's clearly very complimentary, and I know I'm really excited to get my hands on this book. So you're fully backed on Indiegogo, right? Can people still back it and get themselves a copy? How's that going to work? And
yeah, they've got a thing with Indiegogo now where it's called In Demand Store afterwards, and you can basically pre-order a copy. There's awesome. Still a few perks left. Like I limited how many original sketches I do in a book, and there's a handful of those left. A couple other little perky things that you can get if you want, but cool. You certainly can get a copy of the book. And if you pre-order a copy of the book, you get the Star Wars parody sent to you as a PDF, so you get to see the entire Rise of Skywalker parody right away. So.
Awesome. We'll be sure to include the links to that in the description of this episode. We've gone a little long, and I want to respect your time. Do you have a little more time for questions from our loyal listeners?
Sure, you bet.
Okay. You don't have to spend long on these. Okay. So one of Dylan and I's favorite teachers, Mike Steyer, said, how have improvements in drawing technology changed the creative process for artists? Kind of a bigger one, but you can probably tackle it pretty quickly.
Well, I do use a lot of technology. I've got kind of a foot in both worlds there. I still ink traditionally, like with dip pens and brushes. I never was able to ink on the digital side of things, but I do all my coloring digitally. And I kind of waffle back and forth between doing roughs digitally and doing traditionally. But all my finished work is done. I scan all my line work and I color it. So for me, when I first got started in the early 90s as an artist, I went to school in the late 80s. There was no digital anything, in my classes. Like we had an Apple II in the attic of the school it had Mac Paint on it. That was like
Yeah.
that was as good as it got. There wasn't even Photoshop then. So, but I pretty quickly realized that this was the future of this stuff. So I went out and got my own Wacom tablet and got Photoshop and Illustrator and started learning how to do this stuff. And I knew it wasn't so much the process as the end product. Like I knew that art directors were going to want a digital file, not some piece of art they had to send out and get scanned, So that was kind of where I thought that was going to accelerate the digital illustration world. And, so fortunately I taught myself all that stuff. And now it's something I use every day. And I've got a big Wacom Cintiq tablet, one of those big monster ones that I use it every day. So, but it's just a tool, man. It's just a tool. It's
just
like
makes those middle steps a lot faster. Like you're describing, working iteratively, conceptual sketches, mock-ups, pencils, whether that's an illustrator or a writer, you can just do that. Swipe up, send, they can see it quickly, swipe back, so just makes those middle steps processes faster.
Yeah, it definitely has made things faster and more convenient, but there's no piece of technology that makes you draw better.
Amen to that, brother. So here's one from Greg Lawrence. He's got a couple actually. So in your bio, it describes your famously large biceps. That's not part of his question. That's just part of my setup. Would you rather fight a single 100-foot duck or 100 1-foot horses? So a single 100-foot duck or 100 1-foot horses?
Boy, that's a toughie. I guess I'd go with the horses. Because I've got pretty strong legs and I can do a lot of kicking. I think I could kick 100 1-foot horses out of the picture before I got too tired.
The absurdity right now that I'm asking Tom Richmond that question. I know for a fact you've never gotten that one before, so that is great.
That's true.
And how cool that you have an opportunity to encounter these magical, cute little 1-foot horses and you would kick them all.
Just kicking them.
Well, I have to assume that they're aggressive and attacking me. Otherwise, I would just walk by whistling.
Yeah. I thought as the former Star Wars fan, you'd say because you had the high ground, but that's a whole other thing.
All right. Greg also asks, is there anything you were asked to draw for MAD that was too far out there and you refused?
No, they've never asked me to draw anything too far out there.
Easy.
I did refuse one job though, but it was because I was busy. I had to go set up a theme park caricature operation out in New England, and I was literally getting in a truck full of equipment to drive from Minnesota to New Britain, Connecticut, and spend 2 weeks setting up caricatures, airbrush tattoos, and airbrush t-shirt operations in this place. And Mad called me and said, we need you to do a parody of the movie Panic Room, and we've only got like 3 weeks. Can you get it done? And I'm like, no chance.
Yeah.
I can't do it. So I had to turn it down. I was physically ill like that whole drive back there going, I just turned down Mad Magazine. Like, it's over. My life is over. They'll never call me again. They did. I did another job.
They did. It all worked out.
Yeah.
You didn't get to draw Jodie Foster, but it all worked out. At least that time.
Yeah.
What's a skill that you found super useful as an illustrator that you would never have dreamed would be so integral to your work? So I imagine, some caricature artists learn sculpting and they'll sculpt a face and then see it from different angles, or getting really animated to take reference photos.
Boy, that's a toughie. I guess I don't know about a particular skill, but learning how to draw bicycles ended up being something that I was very glad I'd learned how to draw a bicycle. Because you would be surprised how many illustrators, you ask an illustrator, what's something you hate to draw? And I bet 4 out of 5 times they'll say bicycles. I hate to draw them, but I can do it.
It's one of those objects that you think you know what it looks like until you go to draw one.
That's
and then
exactly
you're like,
right.
I have no idea what a bicycle looks like.
Yeah.
It's like, I think there's a triangle in there somewhere. Yeah, I know what you mean. All
My
right.
favorite part of that is in my head, all the non-artists walk into you guys doing that thinking you're having an existential crisis about like, I don't even know what a bicycle looks like. Like you're just breaking down in your office and we have no idea why. It's great.
Okay, last one from Greg Lawrence. Is it pronounced GIF or incorrectly?
Well, fortunately, I would agree it's pronounced GIF.
All right, cool. And then one last one from Kendall's wife, Amy. Did you have to learn to draw in the MAD style? That presumes there is an official house style.
No, in fact, what prevented me from getting into MAD for a period of time was that I drew too similarly to Mort Drucker.
Yeah.
And that was something that so I you know, when I wanted to get into MAD, I was like, well, how do you do that? Well, I'm going to study the masters, right? So I'm like looking at Mort's work, and the whole time I was, you know, doing stuff to send to MAD, I was looking at Mort's stuff and going through it. I wasn't copying it, right? But I was looking at it. And so it was really, you know, kind of getting through into me through osmosis. And I went to show my stuff to the New York guys one time. We were out there before I'd gotten in there, and Nick Meglin took me to lunch at the Society of Illustrators with Sam. And Nick took me aside and he said, this is the best piece of advice I'd ever gotten from anybody, by the way. And he said, look, he said, we like your work. We can tell the difference between an artist that's a rip-off artist of somebody and an artist that's just heavily influenced by somebody. And he said, your work is too influenced by Mort Drucker right now. And he said, we don't need another Mort Drucker. We've got Mort Drucker. He said, what I want to see is the best Tom Richmond. And I was like, oh, okay. So I put away all my MADs. I stopped looking at Mort's stuff. And then I started doing more and more stuff on my own, you know, without any references, or, you know, and then eventually I showed them what they wanted to see. And then I started working for them. So
that's awesome. And that applies to so many other things, right? Like, especially in the world of social media, the comparison game, I've talked about this before, is so dangerous. And it just be the best you can be in whatever you're doing. That doesn't apply to just art, right? So,
right, yeah.
Well, I understand you have a really cool story about some pieces that you did for Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but we're going to save that for some extra content for our listeners. So, Tom, I can't thank you enough for your time. This has been so much fun for me, and I know these guys too. So it's been a blast. Anything else you want to say? Social media, how can people follow you? What's the best way to stay in touch with what you're doing?
Well, just my website, tomrichmond.com, easy to remember. I do a lot of work on my blog, like you mentioned. I try to write on it every day but Saturdays. You know, post sketches and just have fun. Sometimes it's a long, involved thing. Sometimes it's just a little quip or a little sketch or something like that. But always got something new up there. So
cool. Dylan, Kendall, anything from you guys?
That's it. This was great.
All right. Thanks so much. We will see you guys next Wednesday on From the Middle.